It's hard to miss the growing buzz around concepts like cryptocurrencies, who hasn't heard of Bitcoin, and blockchain, the technology that supports it. But what's the relevance to average people like you and me when regular wallets, not digital ones, do the job, and we still see money as coins and paper, not something intangible that's stored in a cloud? Boz Zou is a customer experience strategist and designer who has been grappling with issues like this his entire professional career. Making Banking 3.0 more accessible to all citizens of the world is one of his chief goals. Boz Zou has been creating optimal customer experiences for the last 15 years, with a special focus on the financial marketplace and, of course, the digital environment. He has woven a variety of influences into his work. He's lived in Toronto since 2007 and has been a Canadian citizen since 2012. He has 2 master's degrees from London universities, one focused on human-computer interaction with ergonomics, and his second in visual arts and arts criticism. Another influence is feng shui, and he integrates its precepts of harmony into his consumer experience strategies. Bo, thanks for sitting down with us today and helping us understand the kind of experience we have to look forward to in a world of Bitcoin and blockchain and Banking 3.0. Why don't we start at looking at Banking 3.0 and how we got there from Banking 1.0 and 2.0? Can you walk us through that?
Absolutely. Thanks, Sarah. So Banking 1.0 was really the original retail banking where most of the interactions with your customer is face-to-face. And banking at the time was mostly offline. You probably remember the days when we have to wait in the lines in brick and mortar retail branches. And that was really not very efficient. And the banking experience was a lot of times very daunting. And when we moved into the internet age, right, we really in the past 2 decades or so, especially the past 1 decade, when we had more advanced internet technologies as well as mobile access, where banking are mostly done even today on the internet. Everybody has an internet banking account in most cases, as well as mobile banking apps. So a lot of our banking nowadays are actually done on mobile and desktop devices, and that's really the age of Banking 2.0, which is what we call the rise of the digital banking. So Banking 3.0 is a completely revolutionary banking sort of a model where you no longer need decentralized banking services. Banking is mostly done through decentralized, what we call blockchain, where everybody has the entire copy of the banking information on their services. And Banking 3.0 has a couple of key characteristics. One of them is decentralization, like I mentioned. The other ones are transparency and security. So with the blockchain technology, it is a lot more secure than the traditional retail banking you probably have heard or remember in the movies, where the thieves and robberies can actually go into the retail branch and rob those banks. While in Banking 3.0, that's no longer possible because Banking 3.0 is really based on the most secure and robust technology that we have today behind the entire system.
Bitcoin and blockchain. I confess that I find Bitcoin kind of hard to wrap my brain around. And actually, blockchain too. Can you explain both concepts in a term a layperson can understand? And why should the average person care?
Right. So blockchain, that's a very frequently asked questions. And to be honest, I think the majority of sort of day-to-day average people don't really get what blockchain is about. And it's really hard to paraphrase it probably in 1 or 2 sentences because it's a really complicated technology that's behind the entire cryptocurrency world. That said, if we were to simply put, blockchain is essentially an open ledger. The difference of blockchain versus the traditional database is that information is no longer saved, we typically say somewhere in the cloud or on the server, but instead the majority or the most of the information is actually stored locally distributed across the entire chain. That's why it's called blockchain. It's essentially an open ledger where every single transaction that's ever happened in the system is recorded on every single what we call node, a local copy of the ledger, so that you and me and everybody on the entire blockchain would have exactly the same information. That made it very hard for anyone to make a fraudulent entry or to change any of the information on the blockchain without having to, basically go onto every single computer on the entire network to make those changes, which is impossible. So that's really the benefit of blockchain. And cryptocurrency is essentially an application of blockchain. And back in the days, the first cryptocurrency that was ever created was the Bitcoin. Probably that's still the most well-known one. The inventor was Satoshi, who really wanted to create a currency that's not only digital, but also decentralized and secure. And that was really after the 2008 financial crisis. And he was very successful in creating such a new currency. And cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Bitcash, and many other ones, now we probably have hundreds of them, are really becoming more and more popular nowadays.
That makes a lot more sense. Since you're all about the user experience, what do you think has to be done to make digital currencies more acceptable or relatable or tangible to people? Is there a delivery issue? Do you see digital delivery devices changing to make this happen, and how?
Sure. Like I said earlier, really the whole idea of cryptocurrency really hasn't been around for that long, right? So Mr. Satoshi, which still is a mysterious figure, started the whole movement back in 2008, right after the financial crisis around the world. So that's really when cryptocurrency became known to most of the people in the world. And since then, things have been moving along a lot. That being said, comparing to the traditional financial services system, cryptocurrency is really very new, less than a decade old. And a lot of the new technologies and buzz around it really hasn't been longer than 5 years in the most recent history. So what we're seeing is really the infancy of cryptocurrency as well as blockchain that's being applied across the board. And we are continuously seeing very exciting changes and movements in the space. However, for blockchain and cryptocurrency in general to become more mainstream, there were still many key barriers. One of them is the user experience of the entire cryptocurrency. If you have ever experienced using cryptocurrencies, you probably have noticed, right, from service to service, from platform to platform, you don't really have a standardized system or user interaction model. One system you probably have what we call the cloud-based wallet. The other ones require you to have hardware wallet. So the whole notion and concept of cryptocurrency is really very, very new to the average users. And to be honest, for most of the average users, even for those who have been trading and on cryptocurrencies, probably wouldn't have a clue of what cryptocurrency is about and the technology behind it. So I think to really make it easier for users to understand what cryptocurrencies are and how to best manage their services as well as their assets in the cryptocurrency world, there are a couple of things that needs to be done. Like I said, first of all, we need to make the technology very intuitive and very easy to understand. This is what we call a mental model in user experience design world, where every user has a set understanding of the world, or at least the system they're interacting with. And that's something that we know intuitively or we can learn. And for cryptocurrency, we really have to borrow a lot of the notions, what we call conventions, from the traditional banking world where people have been familiar with for many, many years. Right? So if, for example, the idea of ATM, the idea of bank account, the idea of transfer between accounts, all of those do not exist today in the cryptocurrency world, but those are the things that people would expect when they interact with their money. So those are the kind of conventions we do want to bring forward from the traditional banking world. Of course, the backbone technology will be very different. However, from a user interaction perspective, we really want to make those interactions as familiar and as similar to what people already know. So that's number one. Number two, also from an accessibility perspective, nowadays we don't yet have some dominant cryptocurrency platforms. That's why we desperately need big players to come into the space, or at least some of the fintech companies, to become more mainstream and become more dominant. We do need to have those industry trendsetters or industry leaders to establish some of the standards. Like I said earlier, we don't really have a standardized business model or even standardized user interaction model in the cryptocurrency world, and that's something that we really have to establish before we can make cryptocurrency more popular.
I read in one interview with you where you said that the evolving applications for blockchain are currently a playground for visionaries with resources to put against these efforts. As I presume you're one of those visionaries, where would you like to see efforts be focused? What do you advocate for and why, and how do you see this unfolding?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's a really exciting space. Like I said, in the past 5 years or so, a lot of the brands and startups and innovators are starting to realize the potential of blockchain. And if you just do a little Google search, you can find that there are innovators and entrepreneurs trying to apply or thinking about the potential of applying blockchain technology in pretty much every aspect of our lives, from healthcare to manufacturing to legal issues, government administration, so on and so forth. Every single aspect of our modern lives can be influenced in a positive way with this new technology. That said, I'm particularly interested in the cryptocurrency world because the traditional banking system is far from perfect. When we were in the banking 1.0 age, where most of the banking is done through the offline brick and mortar retail stores, and that's one of the key constraints, is that you do have to physically visit a branch. You have to physically line up and wait to talk to a person, or at least get to an ATM to do your transactions. That's really very inconvenient. And for a lot of people nowadays, where really the whole human civilization has become more spread it out, right? So we can see civilization and we can see businesses and people everywhere around the world, especially in the rural areas. So for banking for 1.0 to have that degree of coverage from a retail perspective, it's simply impossible. Banking 2.0 was slightly better, right? So everything was done through the internet, through mobile or desktop. That said, there were still some fundamental elements missing from making it really inclusive for everyone. Part of that is education, part of that is infrastructure, part of that is the service level. For the traditional banks, which are centralized with employees within the companies to manage everything from transactions to financial advisory and so on and so forth, it's simply not financially viable for them to serve everybody in the world, especially in those remote areas. And as a matter of fact, even today, you probably haven't heard this, we have over 2.5 billion people who have never had a bank account. And that number is just staggering. We have in total nowadays 7 billion people, and more than 1/3 of them, or us, don't really have a bank account. And that really prevented those 2.5 billion people, at least many of them, in the developing world from businesses and having their financial management more convenient in order to make them more successful. So I think coming back to cryptocurrency, it is really a new chapter of the financial services, and it is really opening a lot of new possibilities for us to help serve those underserved, those 2.5 billion people who have never had a bank account for a couple of reasons. Number one, cryptocurrency is decentralized. That means you no longer need a infrastructure, especially a centralized infrastructure where it's very human resource heavy, very costly to operate, and so on and so forth. And you, of course, don't need retail branches to provide those services. Everything is done locally and connected through the blockchain. So that's number one advantage. Number two, also for the fact that there isn't really a centralized layer of management and service, it is a lot more accessible and a lot cheaper compared to the traditional banking services as well. So from a financial perspective, it becomes much more viable for us to actually apply cryptocurrency and blockchain technology across the board. And number three, the technology of blockchain and cryptocurrency may be very advanced, but at the same time, it is very accessible from an infrastructure perspective. The internet network that is required for cryptocurrency to work is not very hard to achieve. We don't really need broadband or high-speed internet. Just traditional dial-up could make it work. So that made it possible for a lot of the rural areas to have access to the blockchain. That's number one. Number two, also increasingly, businesses and innovators are bringing new devices, new hardware that is a lot more affordable, a lot simpler compared to the traditional devices that we are familiar with, such as the laptop, the iPads, the iPhone, and so on and so forth. There are many possibilities nowadays for us to make cryptocurrency accessible and operational on devices like smartwatches, devices like a hardware wallet, and so on and so forth. So me and my company were particularly interested in bringing those affordable technologies, affordable devices to the developing world and really making cryptocurrency a lot more accessible and a lot easier to operate in those parts of the world.
How far off are we in enabling a blockchain-enabled financial system that opens doors to those who currently have no access to banking services as we know them? What do you think it will take to make this a reality?
Sure. As I said earlier in one of the earlier questions, cryptocurrency is still a relatively new technology. It hasn't been around for that long. So it's just in the most recent 5 years or so, a lot of the big financial services brands as well as fintech startups are starting to develop new ideas as well as new technologies in this space. That said, the potential of cryptocurrency as a major financial tool in the new banking system has really been well recognized. In countries like Venezuela, for example, which has been hit recently by the hyperinflation as well as the financial crisis, really the government as well as the people within the country have really looked into how cryptocurrency can help the economy as a whole. Many other countries are doing the same, especially in Africa and many parts of the developing world around the world. People are starting to realize the potential of cryptocurrencies. And there is really a lot of business value as well. Just imagine the massive market of 2.5 billion people who have never had a bank account. Those people are becoming more and more prominent in global economy nowadays. And really with a very saturated first world economy that we are seeing today, the developing world and developing countries are really becoming the future focus of a lot of the brands, including financial services. So we're just starting to see financial brands like the banks and the major insurance providers, so on and so forth, as well as many fintech startups are getting into this space and looking into how we can apply blockchain technology as well as cryptocurrencies to really help those underserved traditionally in the banking world. And me included, a lot of the businesses as well as entrepreneurs around me, as well as myself, we're actively working on a couple of things. One of the key things we're working on is to bring very affordable devices that support blockchain as well as cryptocurrency and operate independently from the traditional hardware that is required for technology. For example, the desktop, the iPad, as well as the smartphones. We're really making sure that the developing world, people in the developing world, have access to blockchain with very affordable devices. For example, wearable device, smartwatches that can actually operate without the need of a laptop or without the need of a smartphone. That's really gonna open up a whole horizon and possibilities for those people in the developing world to get access to the cryptocurrency world. So that's number one. Number two, also, we're actively working on establishing new conventions as well as new business models, new standards from a user experience perspective to make sure that we make the cryptocurrency not only transparent and accessible, but also easy to understand, more intuitive, and also moving from services to services, moving from platforms to platforms. You have a very standardized model to operate with, so that people don't have to relearn every single time when they move from service to service, which is a very essential part to make sure that cryptocurrency is easy to adapt for a lot of the newcomers. Number three, we also actively work with government agencies as well as non-government organizations for those policyholders as well as regulation makers, the regulators. It's very important to make sure that they feel comfortable and they see the same potential as we do as entrepreneurs in the cryptocurrency space. Without their support, it's simply extremely difficult to apply cryptocurrency as well as blockchain across the board. The good news is that we're seeing more and more markets, more and more countries, both from a government perspective as well as from the industry standard perspective, embracing blockchain and cryptocurrency as a mainstream technology for the new banking system. So to summarize, all of those key steps need to be taken in order to make cryptocurrency a mainstream technology in the financial services space. We still have a long way to go, but that said, I'm not surprised in the next 3 to 5 years, we're really gonna be seeing cryptocurrency as well as blockchain technology being applied across the board in some of the fast developing markets, such as in Africa, in Asia, in South America. This is really a very exciting time for all of us. So I'm really excited myself. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Bo, for sitting down with us today. Really appreciated having you, and I think we learned a lot about Bitcoin and blockchain and its application, and yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. My pleasure.